He was just a struggling single dad, quiet, tired, and often overlooked. But one rainy evening at a school meeting, someone made a joke that pushed him toward an old piano. And what happened next left the entire room silent. If heartfelt stories move you the way music can, don't forget to subscribe and follow this journey through to the very last note. Now, let's begin. He was asked to play piano as a joke at the school event, but his music left the room. Breathless. The folding chairs creaked as parents settled into the fluorescent-lit gymnasium of Edison Elementary, murmurs bouncing off scuffed hardwood and walls lined with faded banners. Most came dressed in office attire or weekend casuals, safe presentable. Then there was him. Mark Brennan slipped through the side door, ball cap in hand denim work jacket still dusted with the grime of truck oil. He was late, always late. The meeting had already started, but that didn't stop every head in the third row from swiveling as he passed. Even from a distance he looked out of place, rough-edged, solitary. His daughter Emily, sitting alone near the front with a backpack at her feet, caught sight of him and lit up like the gym lights had just turned on for the first time in years. He offered a quick, apologetic smile as he took the empty seat beside her. "Sorry, kiddo. Had to finish a delivery in New Haven. Traffic was a mess." Emily grinned and leaned in, whispering, "They haven't done the music thing yet?" Mark's brows furrowed. Music thing. She just shrugged, excitement bubbling in her face. They let parents do something fun this year, talent sharing or something. Up on stage, the PTA president was speaking about community building and breaking down barriers between parents and staff. Next to her stood the school's new principal, Ms. Lauren Hill, a striking woman in her late 30s, composed yet warm. She clapped politely as the speaker wrapped up, then stepped forward, a clipboard in hand and a teasing smile on her lips. "Okay, folks, let's lighten things up. Anyone brave enough to share a quick talent before we close out silence?" Then came a voice, sharp, amused, from the back of the room. "What about the trucker?" It was a man in a pressed golf shirt seated among a group of smirking parents. "Come on, let's see what blue collar sounds like on the piano." A few chuckles rippled across the rows. Mark's body tensed. Emily looked up at him, confused. "They're talking about you." He didn't respond, didn't flinch, just stared ahead as Lauren scanned the room. Her gaze landed on Mark. A flicker of recognition passed across her face, though she couldn't quite place him. Still, she stepped in to salvage the moment. "No pressure, of course," she said gently. "But we do have a piano here. If anyone feels like sharing something—" Emily tugged on his sleeve. "You can play Dad." Mark didn't move. "Please." He turned toward her. Her eyes were wide, not pleading exactly, but trusting, believing. And that was what did it. He stood slowly. The room fell quiet. The PTA president's brows lifted in surprise. The parents who had laughed now watched with half-amused skepticism. Lauren folded her arms, curious. Mark walked down the narrow aisle, each step like a drumbeat against the stillness. At the front, he hesitated beside the piano, an old upright with chipped ivory keys and a nameplate dulled by time. He ran his fingers lightly over the surface, then looked up, locking eyes with Lauren for the first time. There was something there, something unspoken. She didn't smile, just nodded once. He sat. Silence deepened. Mark closed his eyes. His hands hovered over the keys. And then he played. Not a jingle, not a clumsy rendition of a wedding march. He played Clair de Lune, but not the standard version. This one breathed differently, jazz-touched like moonlight trickling over rain-soaked pavement. The left hand pulsed gently with a syncopated rhythm while the right whispered melodies that didn't quite belong to Debussy anymore. They belonged to him. The rubato swayed with aching freedom as if time itself had stopped to listen. The notes weren't just notes, they were memories. Of Sunday mornings when his mother hummed as she made pancakes. Of the night he played in the state competition and saw his father smile from the back row, the only time he ever remembered him doing that. Of the silence that followed his mother's final breath. His fingers told stories his voice had never dared speak. And in that old gym, something changed. Parents forgot their phones. A child in the corner began to cry, not knowing why. Lauren's lips parted slightly, her breath catching as she recognized not just the piece but the soul behind it. She had heard this interpretation once before, years ago, at a student recital broadcast from Boston. She had memorized it, loved it, searched for the pianist who had vanished from the scene not long after. Her heart thundered. When the final note faded, Mark didn't move. The air was thick with something sacred. Then small footsteps. Emily. She climbed the steps to the stage and wrapped her arms around her father's waist. "That was beautiful," she whispered. For a second, he didn't speak. Then his hand rested gently on her back. The gym erupted in applause, not polite, but raw and grateful. Some stood, others wiped their eyes. The men who had mocked him earlier now sat frozen, expressionless. Mark rose, nodded once, and walked down the steps with Emily at his side. He didn't smile, didn't bow. He had said everything he needed to say with his hands. Behind him, Lauren remained still, hand over her chest, her eyes not leaving him as he walked away. She knew that she had just heard something no one else in that room would forget, and she wasn't about to let him disappear again. The smell of worn upholstery and gasoline clung to Mark Brennan as he drove through the quiet back streets of Hamden. The dashboard of his aging pickup glowed, faintly casting shadows over his tired face. Emily sat in the passenger seat, still beaming legs swinging slightly off the torn vinyl seat. Her backpack lay in her lap, half-zipped a sparkly sticker of a musical note barely clinging to the fabric. "Dad," she said softly, breaking the silence between them. "I didn't know you could play like that." Mark's grip on the steering wheel tightened the skin of his knuckles, stretching pale. "It was a long time ago, Em." "But it didn't sound like a long time ago," she insisted. "It sounded like magic." He let out a breath through his nose, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "Guess some things don't rust easy." Emily looked at him, studying the stubble along his jaw, the deep creases near his eyes. "Why didn't you ever tell me Mark didn't answer?" They pulled into the gravel driveway of their small duplex on the edge of town. A sagging porch greeted them, one side of the gutter still bent from the last nor'easter. Mark climbed out, reached back for Emily's backpack, and held it out as she hopped down. The cold November air stung their cheeks. Inside their home was modest clean, but lived in. Faded wallpaper peeled slightly at the corners, and the furnace rattled whenever it kicked on. In the living room, an old upright piano sat beneath a lace curtain window, the keys yellowed, some slightly chipped. It had once belonged to his mother. Emily stopped short in front of it. "You have one here," she whispered. "You've always had one." Mark didn't say anything. He walked past her into the kitchen, flicked on the light, and opened a can of chili. As it simmered, he leaned against the counter and stared at the far wall like it might offer answers. He could still feel the keys under his fingers. They weren't smooth anymore. His hands were calloused from years of loading crates and hauling equipment. But when he played, they remembered. That scared him more than he cared to admit. Emily appeared in the doorway, her eyes hesitant. "Was that song something you made up?" No, Mark replied. "It's called Clair de Lune. A French composer wrote it. But it didn't sound like the version I heard on YouTube. That's because I played it differently." How he turned, looked at her, saw her curiosity, her longing to understand. He softened. When you know a piece so well that it's a part of you, you can stretch it. Like pulling taffy. You slow down here, speed up there. You let silence speak when notes can't. That's called rubato. "Rubato," she repeated slowly. He smiled faintly. "Exactly." Emily paused, then asked, "Did you used to play in concerts?" He nodded once. "Before you were born." "Why'd you stop?" He turned back to the chili, stirred it with a slow hand. Life got complicated. Emily waited, sensing the end of the conversation. She crossed to the piano, pressed one tentative note. It rang out, pure and lonely. "Do you think you could teach me?" she asked. Mark didn't respond right away. He closed his eyes, remembering what it had cost him to walk away from it all. competitions, conservatories, the scholarships. And yet tonight, for the first time in years, his fingers had found something more important than applause. Emily's awe. He opened his eyes. Maybe. We'll see. She smiled and ran off to her room, the floorboards creaking beneath her feet. Mark stood alone again, the house settling around him, the silence almost too full. Elsewhere in town, Lauryn Hill sat at her desk in the dim light of her office. The school had long since emptied out, but she hadn't wanted to go home. Not yet. Not after that. She had heard talent before. Trained talent. Students who could mimic technique, teachers who could impress with theory. But that performance tonight, it wasn't just played. It was lived. She opened her laptop, typed Claire de Lune, jazz interpretation male pianist, but the results were scattershot. She frowned, brows furrowing. She remembered the feeling of that rendition, how the rubato had made the melody bend like willow branches in the wind, the left hand providing just enough resistance to hold it in the air. She'd heard it once before, in 1997. A music program on public access television had broadcast a competition from Massachusetts. A teen boy, unnamed anonymous in the video clip, had performed a version of Claire de Lune that had haunted her ever since. The recording had gone missing from the station's archives, but she remembered it down to the final decrescendo. She shut the laptop, heart thudding. Could it be? She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. "Mark Brennan," she whispered. "Who are you?" Her phone buzzed an email from the school secretary forwarding a thank you note from a parent complimenting the blue-collar dad with the hands of a poet. Lauren smiled at the phrase. Hands of a poet. She didn't know what pulled at her more, the music or the man behind it. But either way, she wasn't done listening. Not yet. Not even close. The morning after the performance, sunlight filtered through the windows of Lauryn Hill's modest, colonial-style home in the heart of Hamden. Steam curled from a mug of black coffee as she sat on the edge of her velvet reading chair, legs tucked under her, a worn-out notepad resting across her knees. She hadn't slept much. Her thoughts were too full, looping back again and again to the man at the piano the night before. It wasn't just the music. It was the weight in his shoulders, the restraint in his expression, the way he walked off stage without basking in the applause like the sound of hands clapping belonged to someone else. But mostly it was the music. The moment Mark Brennan's fingers touched the keys, Lauren had felt a rupture in the air like something sacred had been let loose. She had studied piano herself. She'd taught music in 3 districts before becoming principal. She knew every interpretation of Claire de Lune that was out there. But this one carried grief and longing like a melody that had waited too long to be heard. It wasn't the performance of someone merely talented. It was the voice of someone who had loved, lost and buried a piece of himself beneath the silence. She set the mug down and rose from the chair. Her steps led her upstairs to the attic where the smell of cedar and dust clung to the air like memory. She hadn't been up there in years. Her mother's boxes were still untouched in the far corner, old LP's photo albums, and the last letters her mother had written before the cancer took her. Lauren knelt beside the largest trunk and lifted the lid, exhaling at the familiar creak of the hinges. She thumbed through decades of records before she found a clear plastic sleeve inside of which was a burned CD with a handwritten label. Boston Youth Concerto Competition, 1997. Finalist M. Brennan. Her pulse leapt. She hadn't seen the name in over 2 decades. The footage had aired once an afterthought on a local PBS station. She had been 14, watching with her mother, who played the piano as a hobby. That night, the boy on screen had changed the way she understood music. His version of Claire de Lune had made her cry, and she hadn't cried much, not even then. Lauren had spent years trying to find that recording again to no avail. Until now. She rushed downstairs, blew the dust from an old portable CD player, and slipped the disc in. A moment of static. Then the soft swell of Debussy reimagined in hands that didn't play so much as pray. And she knew. It was him. Mark Brennan wasn't just someone who played piano well. He was the one who had disappeared, walked away from the brink of brilliance. She closed her eyes as the melody filled the room. The phrasing was the same as last night, the same aching pauses between the notes, the same melancholy grace like someone dancing alone on a frozen lake. Tears welled without permission. Her mother had whispered something that night in 1997 as they sat side by side listening. If you ever find the person who can play like that, Lauren, don't let him slip away. That's the kind of soul you wait for in this life. At the time, it had sounded romantic. Now it sounded prophetic. She listened to the final notes fall like feathers, and then sat in silence for several minutes after they were gone. Later that afternoon, Lauren stood in the school hallway watching as students poured out of their classrooms in a rush of noise and backpacks. Her heels clicked softly on the polished floor as she made her way toward the second-grade wing. Emily Brennan was by her cubby helping another little girl zip up her jacket. She was kind, always had been. Thoughtful, patient, the sort of child who reflected the depth of love she must receive at home. Lauren waited until the hallway cleared. "Emily," she said warmly. The girl turned, eyes lighting up. "Hi, Ms. Hill." "Hi there. Can I steal a minute of your time?" Emily nodded quickly, her curiosity sparking. "I wanted to tell you something," Lauren said gently as she knelt down to the child's level. "Your dad's music last night. It touched a lot of people. It was very, very special." Emily beamed. "I know. I was so proud." Lauren smiled. "You should be. Not everyone has a gift like that." "Has he always played?" "He used to, but I'd never seen it until last night. He said he stopped a long time ago." Lauren nodded slowly. "Well, sometimes when someone has a gift that big, it doesn't really go away. It just waits." Emily's smile faded slightly. "He looked a little sad when he played, but not in a bad way. Just like he remembered something." That made Lauren pause. She reached out and touched the girl's shoulder. "Thank you for telling me that. You're very wise." Emily shrugged shyly. "My mom used to say the same thing." It hit Lauren like a chord pressed too hard, raw and unfiltered. "I'm sure she was a wonderful woman." "She was," Emily whispered. A pause hung between them before Lauren cleared her throat and stood. "If it's okay with your dad, maybe we could find a way to let him play again. Maybe at a school event or something small." Emily lit up again. "You really think he would?" "I think. Maybe he needs someone to believe he still can." That night, back in her office, Lauren pulled out a blank note card and began to write. "Dear Mr. Brennan, I want to thank you for what you shared with us at last night's meeting. It was more than music. It was a moment that none of us will forget. I know you didn't intend to become the center of attention, but sometimes the quietest voices leave the loudest echoes. If you're open to it, I'd love to talk more about music, about possibilities, and about what comes next. Sincerely, Lauren Hill." She signed it, slid it into an envelope, and placed it in her bag. Tomorrow she'd find a reason to pass by his daughter's classroom. And maybe, just maybe, she'd learn why someone with a soul like his ever stopped playing in the first place. The old upright piano in the gymnasium hadn't been tuned in years. Its keys bore the wear of school assemblies, talent shows, and the sticky fingers of 100 restless children. But that night, under flickering fluorescent lights and the uncomfortable gaze of dozens of parents, it sounded like something else entirely. Mark sat motionless before it, Emily's hopeful eyes still lingering in his mind. His back was straight, his fingers hovering just above the keys' calloused hands that hadn't graced an audience in over 2 decades. He could still feel the echo of the last time he'd played for a crowd, Boston, 1997. A televised youth competition. His name had been whispered by judges, critics, even college scouts. Then his father had a stroke, and the music ended. Until now. He exhaled. Then he played. The opening notes of Clair de Lune fell like soft rain, delicate, unhurried, and impossibly fragile. But almost immediately the piece began to shift like a dream, folding in on itself. Mark's left hand laid down a quiet, syncopated bass line, gentle but pulsing with an energy that felt alive. His right hand danced above it, not in flourishes but in quiet sighs, each phrase shaped by memory more than technique. Rubato bent the rhythm, just so stretching time, then snapping it back like a heart skipping and catching itself again. And in that room, it was as if the walls leaned in to listen. Parents who had rolled their eyes now leaned forward, faces slack. One mother pressed a hand to her chest. A father, arms once crossed, let them fall to his lap. Even the children, normally fidgety and half-tuned out, sat still. But Lauryn Hill... She stood, frozen. The moment the first jazz-hued chord landed, she knew. It wasn't just the interpretation, it was the soul behind it. The push and pull of breath between each phrase. The phrasing that spoke more like language than notes. She'd heard it once before when she was 14 in a room with her mother and a black-and-white television. She remembered the clip so clearly. The boy's name hadn't stuck. Just the feeling that he was speaking a language no one had taught him, but she somehow understood. And now he was here, sitting before her. Mark Brennan. Her pulse drummed at her ribs, but she couldn't look away. Every note he played seemed to carry weight, grief, unspoken promises, broken hope, rediscovered. The crescendo didn't shout. It ached. The decrescendo didn't fade. It lingered. Mark wasn't showing off. He was remembering. The piano beneath his fingers was a bridge between who he had been and who he still might be. He played not to impress, but to reconnect to the boy who had loved this once, and to the little girl who now watched him with awe. Emily. The final note drifted out, held by the sustain pedal just long enough to shimmer and then silence. Mark lowered his hands. No one clapped at first. The quiet was too full. Then Emily stood her small feet, padding softly up the steps to the stage. She didn't speak. She just wrapped her arms around his waist and leaned into him. That's when it happened. The applause came not in a wave, but a swell. Hesitant at first, then undeniable. One by one the audience stood. Some clapped with misted eyes. Others just stared, stunned. Mark blinked, unsure what to do with their faces. Lauryn took a step forward, arms crossed over her heart like she was holding something fragile inside her. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment, hers searching his guarded. Then he gently squeezed Emily's shoulder, guided her down the steps, and made his way toward the exit, nodding politely at the passing faces, his expression unreadable. He never looked back at the piano. He never saw Lauryn take one step after him, then stop herself. Outside, the night had turned cool and quiet. Mark exhaled into the wind as Emily skipped ahead toward the truck, twirling once like a leaf in the breeze. "You didn't tell me you could do that," she said, her voice high with joy. "I didn't know I still could," he admitted. "But that was amazing, Dad. Like you turned the whole room into music." Mark chuckled under his breath. "You always say the wildest things. I mean it." She climbed into the passenger seat and hugged her backpack tight. "They'll talk about that forever." "I know they will." He paused before getting in, looking up at the dark sky, the moon nearly full. He wasn't so sure, but something had changed. He felt it in the way the air moved, in the way the silence inside him no longer rang quite so empty. Inside the school, Lauryn returned to her office and sat down at her desk, hands still trembling. She replayed the image in her mind, the calloused hands, the music pulled from memory, the little girl's hug. She opened her laptop, typed in a search Mark Brennan piano, and hit enter. Nothing. Not a single performance listing. No YouTube videos. No bio. It was like he'd vanished after that 1997 recital. But Lauryn didn't need the internet to confirm what she already knew in her chest. He was the boy who once made her believe that music could speak truths deeper than words. And now he was the man who had just reminded her why she believed in second chances. She leaned back in her chair, breath shallow, heart loud. She hadn't planned on tonight meaning anything more than a few polite handshakes and an awkward PTA skit. But somehow everything had changed. And she wasn't going to ignore that. Not this time. The envelope sat on Lauryn's desk all morning like it had a pulse. She'd rewritten the note 3 times, once too formal, once too forward, and finally the version that now lay sealed with her name, carefully signed in blue ink. Not Principal Hill, just Lauren. She didn't fully understand why this mattered so much, but something inside her was tugging with insistence. It wasn't just the performance, it was the man behind it, the contrast between the silence in his eyes and the thunder in his music. She couldn't stop thinking about it. Or about him. The first bell rang. Lauren moved through the corridors greeting students with her practiced warmth, but her mind wandered. Mark Brennan had slipped through her fingers once in 1997 when she saw his name flash briefly on a television screen, and never again after. She was just a girl then. But now, she wasn't going to miss him twice. When the hallway cleared and classrooms settled into their morning rhythm, she made her way toward the second-grade wing envelope in hand. Emily's classroom door was propped open. The girl sat at her desk drawing a tiny piano on the corner of her math worksheet. Lauren knocked gently on the frame. The teacher looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Ms. Hill." "Morning," Lauren replied. She stepped just inside, keeping her voice soft. "I have something for Emily's dad. Would you mind if I leave it with her?" The teacher glanced at Emily. Not at all. Lauren knelt beside the girl's desk and offered the envelope. "Hi, Emily." "Hi, Ms. Hill." Emily smiled, her eyes bright. "This is for your dad. Could you make sure he gets it?" Emily nodded eagerly. "Is it about the music?" Lauren's smile deepened. "Sort of. It's about what comes next." That evening, Mark came home late again. His workday had been longer than planned. A last-minute delivery extension traffic on the parkway, a flat on I-84. The smell of diesel still clung to his jacket as he stepped into the house. Emily was at the table scribbling on a piece of construction paper. "Hi, Daddy." He dropped his keys in the ceramic bowl by the door. "Hey, Peanut." She sprang up and handed him the envelope with both hands. "From Ms. Hill. She said it's about what comes next." Mark raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" "I don't know." She shrugged, then grinned, but she was smiling when she said it. Mark turned the envelope in his hands. It was light, neat, deliberate. He opened it carefully. "Dear Mr. Brennan, last night your music left an imprint on this school and on many of us personally. It was more than talent. It was truth. I hope you'll forgive me for saying this so directly, but I believe there's more to your story than what we saw on that stage. If you're open to it, I'd love to hear about that story. No expectations, no spotlight, just conversation. There's a bench on the east side of Mill River Park. I walk there most weekends. Saturday at 10 a.m., if you're free. Warmly, Lauren Hill." He read it twice, then a third time. It wasn't romantic, but it wasn't impersonal either. There was curiosity behind those words, not the kind that gawked, but the kind that listened. He set the letter down. Emily watched him closely. "Are you going to go?" "I don't know yet." "You should," she said like it was the most obvious answer in the world. "She likes your music, and she was really nice to me today." Mark stared at the ceiling for a moment, his jaw tight. "It's just been a long time since someone asked me to talk about the past." Emily reached out and touched his hand. Maybe that's because no one was ready to hear it until now. He looked down at her heart, twisting at the simple wisdom in her voice. Then he nodded. "All right," he said quietly. "Maybe I will." Saturday morning arrived crisp and golden. Autumn had fully settled in turning the trees at Mill River Park into towers of flame. Mark arrived, early hands stuffed in the pockets of his faded jacket, his boots crunching along the path. He saw her before she saw him. Lauren sat on the bench facing the river scarf, loose around her neck, a paperback resting on her knee, but forgotten. The breeze played gently with her hair. She looked peaceful, but not distant. Focused. Present. Mark hesitated, then stepped forward. She turned at the sound of his approach and smiled, not a polite smile, but one of quiet welcome. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I wasn't sure either." They sat in silence for a beat. Then Lauren turned to him, hands folded in her lap. "I hope I didn't overstep writing to you." "No," Mark said. "You didn't." She nodded, then asked, "Do you still play?" He looked out at the river. "Not really. Only when no one's watching. Or when someone's watching who matters." She considered that. "Why'd you stop?" Mark took a long breath. "My dad got sick when I was 17. Stroke. He couldn't work. My mom had passed a few years before. I was supposed to go to Juilliard, had the recommendation letter ready. But I stayed. Because of him. Because family doesn't disappear when it's inconvenient." Lauren said nothing for a moment. Then that was a choice. A brave one. It didn't feel brave. It felt necessary. Their eyes met again, and something unspoken passed between them. "I heard you," she said, voice quieter now. "When you played, I don't mean the notes, I mean you. Your story." Mark didn't know what to say. No one had ever said that before, so she continued. "When I was a girl, I heard your version of Claire de Lune on TV. I memorized it. I thought about it for years. It made me believe in music again after my mom got sick. That sound, that depth, it didn't just entertain. It healed." She smiled gently. "And last week I heard it again. Same touch, same soul, only stronger, wiser." Mark blinked against the wind. "You remembered me?" he asked. "No," she replied softly. "I remembered the feeling of you." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The river flowed steadily beside them. Finally, Mark cleared his throat. "I don't know if I still belong to that part of myself." "I think you never stopped," Lauren replied. "You just needed someone to remind you it was still there." Mark looked down at his hands. Calloused, scarred, but still capable, and maybe ready to play again. The attic hadn't been opened in years. The wooden ladder groaned beneath Lauren's weight as she climbed up slowly, carefully. Dust stirred in the filtered morning light motes drifting through the air like memories too long buried. The scent hit her the moment she pulled herself up, aged cardboard old linens, the faint sweetness of cedar, and something else. Something distinctly her mother, lavender and yellowed paper. She hadn't planned on coming up here. Not today. But after her conversation with Mark at the park, something had lodged in her chest like a note left unresolved. The words he said, the way his voice trembled just slightly when he spoke of his past, it was the same tremor she'd heard in that Claire de Lune performance all those years ago. Not just a brilliant rendition, a soul echo. And now she needed proof. Lauren crouched beside a weathered trunk and brushed her fingers over the lid. Her mother's writing was faint but still visible. Spring 1997. Music recital recordings. She lifted the lid. Inside were half a dozen VHS tapes, a few faded photo envelopes, and one plastic CD sleeve with a note scrawled in blue ink, PBS, Youth Concerto Finals, April 1997. Finalist, M. Brennan. Her breath hitched. She remembered this. The night it aired, her mother had pulled her away from homework saying, "Just listen. Don't watch. Let the music draw the picture." She'd closed her eyes, then headphones too large on her head, and listened to a boy, just a boy, paint galaxies with a piano. Lauren hurried back downstairs, clutching the disc like something sacred. She dusted off the old stereo tucked in the corner of her living room, one her mother had insisted on keeping, even after smartphones and Bluetooth had long taken over. The CD tray slid open with a soft mechanical whir. She inserted the disc, pressed play, and sat back. A few seconds of static. Then silence. Then the music. The first notes curled out of the speakers like breath fogging up a mirror. Familiar. Intimate. Raw. It was him. There could be no doubt now. That same impossible blend of classical structure and emotional improvisation. That same restrained aching in every line. The pauses where others would rush. The spaces between the notes that said more than any lyric ever could. And that final chord, the one she'd remembered for over 20 years, soft as snowfall and impossibly slow, as if even the piano didn't want to say goodbye. Tears streamed down Lauren's face before she even realized she was crying. She pressed a hand to her mouth and let herself feel it. The ache of recognition, the gravity of something once lost, now returned. For so long she'd thought she'd imagined that performance, or that she'd given it more meaning than it deserved. But it had meant something. It had meant everything. That music had carried her through her mother's final hospital stay, through the long silence that followed. And now, sitting in her living room hearing it again, Lauren felt a circle slowly, silently closing. She let the music finish. And then she played it again. That night, Mark sat on the floor of his living room surrounded by a clutter of unopened mail and old sheet music he hadn't touched in years. After their meeting in the park, he couldn't shake the feeling Lauren had left him with not just admiration, but recognition. She'd seen through him like no one else had in decades. And, stranger still, it didn't make him feel exposed. It made him feel understood. He opened a dusty crate and pulled out a stack of old notebooks. In the middle of them, folded between pages, was a photo from 1997. Him on stage, mid-performance, his head slightly bowed, one hand suspended above the keys. He looked so young, so hopeful, so unaware of what life would take from him before it gave anything back. Emily wandered in, sleepy-eyed in her flannel pajamas. "Dad, what are you doing? Just going through some things." She curled up beside him and looked over his shoulder at the photograph. "You look different." "Yeah," he said. "I was about your age when I first started practicing 4 hours a day." "Did you like it?" Mark thought about that for a long moment. "I loved it. It was the only time I felt like I could say everything I didn't know how to put into words." "Then, why'd you stop?" He smiled sadly. "Because life got louder than the music." Emily tilted her head. "I think maybe the music just waited. Until it was ready to be heard again." Mark blinked. How did she always know exactly what to say? "Come on," she said, standing. "I want to show you something." He followed her to the piano in the corner. She sat on the bench and patted the space beside her. "I've been practicing, in secret." Mark raised a brow. "You have." Emily opened a music book dog-eared with stickers on the cover and began to play a simple melody. It was clumsy, uneven, but it was music. Her fingers trembled, her posture was wrong, but the heart was there. And when she finished, she looked up at him, unsure. Mark didn't clap. He reached over and gently placed his hand on top of hers. "Let me show you something." He played the same tune back to her, but added a left-hand accompaniment, a gentle rolling chord that filled the room with warmth. They played it again together. Note by note, Mark began to remember not just the music, but the feeling of teaching, of connecting, of giving his gift not to the world this time, but to someone who would carry it forward. When they finished, Emily smiled, her eyes glowing. "You're gonna play again, aren't you?" Mark looked down at his hands, rough-scarred but steady. "I think I already am." Miles away, Lauren sat at her kitchen table still listening to the recording, a glass of wine untouched beside her. She didn't know exactly what would come next. But she knew this: there are some songs that don't let go. Some stories that wait in silence, patient and whole, until the moment someone is finally ready to hear them. And when they do, it changes everything. Saturday afternoon light spilled gently across the tables at Coffee Bloom, a cozy shop tucked between a bookstore and an aging music store on Main Street. Mark Brennan stirred a little honey into his tea, the spoon tapping softly against ceramic as he watched the window fog slightly with the chill from outside. Autumn in Hamden had arrived fully now. Crimson leaves scattered the sidewalks and the air held the clean scent of wood smoke and distant rain. Lauren sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a mug of something warm and cinnamon-scented. She wasn't in heels or her usual blazer today. Instead, she wore a thick knit sweater and jeans, her dark hair loose, her expression open. She studied him carefully, not the way a teacher studies a student, but the way a musician reads a sheet of music written in someone else's hand. "I listened to the recording," she said softly. Mark looked up. "The one from last week." She shook her head. "The one from PBS, April 1997. He blinked. "It was you, wasn't it?" she asked. "Boston, the Youth Concerto Finals." Mark's breath left him slowly, as though something fragile inside had just cracked open. I didn't think anyone had that anymore. I found it in my attic, she said. My mother recorded it. You played Clair de Lune just like last week. But back then, you played it like a boy who didn't know what the world could take from him yet. He swallowed. And now, Lauren continued, her voice gentle. You play it like a man who's lived through the taking, and somehow still has something beautiful to give. Mark looked down at his tea. That's a poetic way of saying, I've gotten older. It's not about age, she replied. It's about honesty. That's what I heard in your music. That's what I think everyone heard. He didn't answer immediately. His gaze wandered to a young man at the far table with earbuds in, bobbing his head to something the rest of the world couldn't hear. Mark smiled faintly. When I was 17, he said I had a full scholarship lined up to Juilliard. Letters from professors. Offers from 2 small record labels. A music mentor who thought I'd be playing in Europe by the time I was 21. Lauren's breath caught. You were that good. I was young and obsessed. I practiced 5-6 hours a day. I didn't have friends. Didn't go to prom. My whole life was piano. What happened? Mark looked at her now, not hiding the weight in his eyes. My father collapsed in the garage 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave for New York. Massive stroke. No health insurance. No extended family. My mom had passed when I was 13. So it was me. I didn't even think about it. I just stayed. Sold the piano. Took a job. Paid the bills. Lauren sat back, stunned by the clarity in his voice. No bitterness. No regret. Just fact. You gave it all up, she said. Mark shook his head. I didn't give it up. I traded it. For what? For him. For doing what was right. Music was my passion, but my father was my responsibility. She didn't respond right away. Outside, a breeze lifted the fallen leaves and spun them in a delicate dance against the glass. And, after he passed, she finally asked. I didn't know how to go back to it. I tried once or twice, but it didn't feel the same anymore. The fire was gone. Or maybe I was afraid of what it would feel like to open that door again. Lauren leaned in slightly. It wasn't gone. You just buried it. Mark exhaled a dry chuckle. You say that like you've done it before. She smiled wistfully. My mom was a piano teacher. She used to play every morning before she got sick. After she passed, I didn't touch a piano for 6 years. Then one night I walked into a cafe where someone was playing this soft jazz tune, and I sat there and cried for 20 minutes. Because I missed her, and because I missed who I was when I was with her. Their eyes met, and in that quiet gaze something deep shifted, something that had nothing to do with music and everything to do with understanding. Mark broke the silence first. Emily doesn't know any of this. Not the Juilliard stuff, not Boston, not even the stroke. She doesn't need the resume, Lauren said gently. She already knows what matters. He tilted his head. What's that? That her dad plays with his heart, and that his heart is worth listening to. Mark blinked. His throat was tighter than it had been a moment ago. They sat for a while longer, watching the sun drop lower behind the bookstore's brick facade. Then Lauren reached into her bag and pulled out a small square invitation. The school's hosting a fundraiser next Friday, she said. Music for Hope. We're raising money for kids who can't afford private lessons or instruments. He raised an eyebrow. You want me to play? I want you to be heard, she corrected. Really heard? This town thinks they met you at that PTA meeting, but they haven't really met you yet. Mark looked down at the invitation, then back at her. What if I say no? Then I'll ask again next month, Lauren said with a smile, and the month after that. I'm patient. He shook his head, amused. You really believe there's still something left in me worth sharing? Lauren didn't blink. I know there is. He folded the invitation and tucked it into his jacket pocket. I'll think about it. She stood and gathered her things. Good. Just promise me one thing. Depends what it is. If you decide to play again, don't play for them. or for me? Play for the boy who never got to finish his story. Mark didn't answer. But when she walked out the small cafe bell jingling above the door, he looked down at his calloused hands resting on the table. And for the first time in 20 years, he felt them itching to touch the keys. The rain had come without warning, one of those gentle October showers that seemed to wash the world quieter. Outside, Edison Elementary puddles gathered on the walkways, reflecting the glow of lampposts like scattered stars. Inside, however, the air thrummed with low voices and anticipation. Parents, teachers, and students filled the gymnasium, now transformed into a humble concert space. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows, a string of warm fairy lights draped across the back curtain. At the far end of the stage stood the school's old upright piano, polished, tuned, and waiting. The fundraiser had been Lauren's idea, but it had taken on a life of its own in the past week. Flyers had gone out across town. A few local musicians had volunteered to play. The proceeds would go toward instruments and scholarships for underprivileged students. But there was only one performance that everyone seemed to be whispering about. Is he really going to do it? Wasn't he the truck driver who played at that meeting? I heard he used to be famous. Lauren stood backstage adjusting her scarf in the mirror with trembling fingers. She wasn't nervous for herself. Not tonight. Tonight wasn't about her. It was about him. She stepped out onto the stage and smiled as the audience quieted. "Good evening," she began, voice warm but steady. "Thank you all for being here tonight. Music has always been a part of this school's soul. But tonight it's about more than songs. It's about second chances. About stories that wait in silence until someone is ready to tell them again." She looked out into the crowd, and for a moment her eyes found Emily seated in the front row, cheeks flushed with pride, her feet not quite reaching the floor. Lauren smiled. "Our final piece tonight is a gift. One that many of you first experienced unexpectedly at a recent parent meeting. Tonight, I hope you'll listen again with open hearts. Please welcome Mark Brennan." The room filled with applause, gentle, expectant, as Mark stepped into view from stage left. He looked different tonight. Not in clothing, he still wore his worn black jeans and a button-down shirt rolled at the sleeves, but in presence. There was something in his eyes now that hadn't been there before. Not confidence exactly, but peace. He sat before the piano, paused, and looked into the crowd. His gaze stopped at Emily. She nodded, once eyes wide. Then he began. But it wasn't Claire de Lune. Not this time. This time he played something of his own. A slow, mournful melody in D minor, simple at first. Just a right hand tracing out the tune, delicate and hesitant like a child's first words after a long silence. Then the left hand joined, adding harmony, structure, strength. The music told a story. One without lyrics but heavy with meaning. You could hear the echoes of loss in the descending scales, the resilience in the rising arpeggios. There was space between the notes, room to breathe, to feel, to remember. Lauren, standing just off stage, brought a hand to her mouth. She recognized it. The opening motif had been hinted at in his Claire de Lune, a phrase tucked into the bridge just once. Now it had bloomed into its own full piece, a composition that sounded like rain falling on the roof of a quiet house, like a father cradling his child, like regret turned into grace. About halfway through, a subtle change came over the music. A voice joined him. Lauren stepped forward, her own nerves drowned by something stronger. She didn't look at the audience. Her eyes were on Mark, and when she opened her mouth, the first note that came out was clear, warm, and low. She didn't sing in English. She sang in Italian, an old lullaby her mother used to hum during the evenings when the pain was bad and the only comfort came from music. The words didn't need translation. They were felt. The pairing was seamless. His melody wrapped around her voice like shelter, and her voice lifted his song like prayer. No microphones, no grand production, just a piano and a voice meeting in the middle of a moment that no one in the room would forget. When the final note faded, there was a silence that stretched like a held breath. Then came the applause. It wasn't thunderous, it wasn't wild, it was reverent. Some stood, some clutched hands, and many, without even realizing, wiped tears from their cheeks. Mark stood slowly, not bowing, just nodding with humble gratitude. He glanced down at Lauren and their eyes met across the stage. There was no need for words. After the performance, the crowd slowly thinned. Compliments were murmured, hands were shaken, but Mark remained near the piano, reluctant to leave its side. It felt like home in a way his apartment never had. Lauren approached her shoes, clicking softly against the floor. "You wrote that, didn't you?" she asked. Mark nodded. "Started it years ago. Never finished. Until this week. It's beautiful. It's for Emily," he said. "And for the part of me I thought I'd buried with the last chord I played before walking away." Lauren smiled, eyes glistening. "It didn't sound like goodbye tonight." "No," he said, voice low. "It didn't feel like one, either." From the back of the gym, Emily's voice rang out clear and excited. "Dad, Ms. Hill. Come see, there's a cake." They both laughed. Mark turned to Lauren, his voice softer now. "I don't know where this goes from here, but I know I'm not done playing." Lauren stepped closer just enough that her shoulder brushed his. "Then, don't stop." He looked at her, truly looked, and something in him finally relaxed. Maybe some stories didn't end. Maybe they just paused until the next note was ready. And tonight the music had started again. The Monday after the fundraiser felt different, like the town was still humming from the music that had floated through the gymnasium 3 nights earlier. Conversations in coffee shops centered around that performance. Local Facebook groups buzzed with cell phone videos, and teachers at Edison Elementary walked into work with a spark in their step. But Mark Brennan had returned to his usual routine. Sort of. He'd dropped Emily off at school with her favorite granola bar and a hair braid she'd insisted on learning from a YouTube video. Then he drove to his job site, helped unload an HVAC unit into a cramped basement, and laughed with his crew over stale donuts and lukewarm coffee. But something was shifting. Every once in a while, Mark would catch himself humming, while lifting, while tying down a truckload, while watching the steam rise from his thermos. It wasn't conscious. It was as if the music had been stirred back into him and now refused to sit still. That afternoon, his phone buzzed just as he was wrapping a ratchet strap on the back of a truck. A number he didn't recognize. He hesitated, then answered. Mark Brennan, speaking. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional. "Mr. Brennan, this is Deborah Wolf from WNH Public Radio. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Mark blinked. No, I'm fine. We received a recording of your performance from Edison Elementary's fundraiser. One of our listeners submitted it to our Arts and Culture desk. I wanted to reach out personally. He didn't speak uncertain whether he was being praised or politely warned. It was extraordinary, she continued. Your composition was original. Yes, it moved people. Deeply. It moved me. Mark wiped a hand on his jeans, struggling to find his footing in this unexpected moment. Thank you. That means a lot. We'd love to do a segment, she said. An interview. Maybe even a feature performance in our studio. Mark went still. You don't have to answer right now, Deborah added quickly. I know it's a lot. But think about it. We're not looking for celebrity stories. We're interested in the human stories. And yours. Her voice softened. Yours is exactly the kind that helps people believe again. He gave her his email and promised to think it over. But even after the call ended, he stood frozen for a long time, the ratchet strap still clutched in his hand. He thought of Emily. He thought of the years that had slipped by without a single key pressed. And he thought of Lauren, her voice soaring in harmony with his melody, the look in her eyes afterward like she saw not just the man he'd become, but the boy who had once dreamed big. That evening, Mark sat at the kitchen table with Emily, a plate of spaghetti between them. She twirled noodles like a seasoned pasta chef, then looked up with a sly grin. Dad. Yeah, I saw Ms. Hill today. She said you got a call from a radio station. Mark raised an eyebrow. She did, huh? Emily shrugged, entirely too innocent. She just mentioned it. Casually. Like in passing. Twice. Mark smirked. She's not subtle. She also said you haven't called them back. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. I haven't decided. Emily set down her fork. Why Mark looked at her really looked. The way her eyes had grown more aware lately. The way her shoulders carried a new kind of strength. She wasn't just his daughter anymore. She was becoming a person with her own rhythm, her own music. I guess I'm afraid of going back to something I had to let go. Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Maybe you're not going back to it. Maybe it's coming forward with you. Mark stared at her. She grinned, proud of her own wisdom, and returned to her pasta. He chuckled, shaking his head. Where do you get this stuff? I read a lot, she said through a mouthful of noodles. Meanwhile, across town, Lauren was in her office at school, replying to emails late into the evening. She'd just finished writing a thank you note to a local violinist who'd performed at the fundraiser when her phone buzzed. A text from Mark. Got a call from WNH. Said they want an interview. I told them I'd think about it. Not sure I'm the interview type. She smiled as she typed back, You're exactly the interview type. Just don't try to be anything you're not. They want you, Mark. The real one. There was a pause. Then, what if that version of me never belonged in that world to begin with? She hesitated, then typed, The world didn't change, Mark, but maybe it's finally ready to hear what you've always had to say. The next day, the school received a letter. It wasn't from the radio station. It was from a parent of one of the students, a woman named Carla Adams, whose son was on the free lunch program whose husband had passed the year before. She'd attended the fundraiser with her child and had sat in the back row trying not to cry during Mark's piece. Her letter was brief, typed, signed by hand. My son hasn't spoken more than a few words to anyone since his father died. But the night after your concert, he came home and asked me if he could learn to play piano. Not video games, not baseball, piano. Thank you for reminding him that his voice matters even if it's only in music for now. Lauren read the letter twice, then once more. She printed it out and walked it across the building to Mark's classroom. He wasn't there, of course, but she slipped it into an envelope and left it in his faculty mailbox with one line handwritten on the front. This is what you've already done. Imagine what else you could do. Outside, the sky darkened again, rain returning in soft, rhythmic taps against the window glass. But inside the halls of the school, something was shifting quietly like a song beginning again after too long a rest. And for the first time in years, Mark Brennan allowed himself to wonder not what he had lost, but what he had yet to share. The wind carried the scent of maple and fireplace smoke as Mark stood in the living room, staring at the old upright piano. The late afternoon light poured through the lace curtains, pooling on the floor like golden silk. Emily sat cross-legged beside him, a stack of music books open between them, her fingers smudged with pencil marks and her cheeks flushed from excitement. Okay, she said, but I don't get this part. She pointed to a cluster of eighth notes at the top of the page. Why does it go faster here if there's no tempo change written? Mark smiled faintly. That's feel, not theory. Emily blinked at him. That's not in the book. It's not supposed to be. He reached over and gently tapped the notes. See, when your heart speeds up, your hands follow. That's how you tell the truth without saying a word. Emily's brow furrowed in concentration as she nodded, eyes flickering between the page and the piano keys. Mark watched her a moment longer, his chest aching in that soft, familiar way, the way a parent's heart always does when watching their child stand on the edge of a discovery. And something inside him moved. He stood, walked to the small bookshelf in the corner of the room, and pulled out an old faded manuscript notebook. The pages were yellowed at the edges. The handwriting inside precise measured his own from decades earlier. Most of it was music, some of it unfinished. There were scraps of melodies, brief lyrical lines, and sections where notes had been erased and rewritten over and over. He turned to the last page. Blank. M, he said. She looked up. I want to show you something. He placed the notebook on the music stand and sat down beside her, brushing his fingers over the keys as if greeting an old friend. The melody came slowly, at first tentative, almost unsure. Then it deepened, expanded. The left hand provided gentle support, a rolling foundation, while the right hand shaped a tune both new and familiar. Emily watched in awe. "What is that?" Mark didn't look at her. His eyes were closed now, lost in the sound. "It's the piece I never finished." She leaned closer, captivated. "When did you start it?" He smiled softly. "The night you were born." The music swelled more confident now. A quiet joy wrapped around its core like light through rain. The middle section lifted into a tender waltz rhythm, soft, circling like a dance between a father and daughter beneath twinkling lights no one else could see. Emily didn't speak again. She just listened. When the final chord fell, a warm, open D major, Mark let his hands linger. The vibrations in the wood beneath the piano lid trembled softly like breath held and released. He looked over at her. "What do you think?" Emily's eyes shimmered. "It sounds like home." Mark's throat tightened. "That's what I was hoping." Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed and the dishes were drying in the rack, Mark returned to the piano. A fire crackled in the corner and the quiet of the house wrapped around him like a blanket. He sat in the dark for a long time, notebook open, pencil in hand. He wrote the title at the top of the page. Song for Emily. Then he began writing the notes, measure by measure, this time with intention. This time to finish. He didn't realize how much time had passed until he heard a knock at the door. It was nearly 9. He opened it to find Lauren standing there in a navy coat, rain caught in the loose curls of her hair. She held something in her hands, a framed photo of her mother at the piano. "I don't know why," she said a little breathless, "but I felt like tonight was the right time." Mark stepped aside and let her in. She walked slowly, taking in the warmth of the space, the firelight, the worn couch, the scattered music sheets. He watched as her gaze landed on the piano. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's old. That's what makes it beautiful." She turned to him, then held out the frame. "My mom played this piece for me when I was little," she said, "but I haven't heard it since she passed. Not until you played at the fundraiser." He accepted the photo, gently nodding, understanding more than she had to say. "You want to hear something new?" he asked. "I always do." He sat. She sat beside him. Their shoulders touched. Mark opened the notebook to the first full page. Then he played. Not for a crowd, not for applause, just for this room, for this moment, for the little girl upstairs who had reawakened something in him, and for the woman beside him who had reminded him it was still there. The melody floated through the house, wrapping itself around old wounds, old silences, old regrets, and transformed them. Lauren closed her eyes and leaned her head gently against his shoulder. "You found it," she whispered. "What?" "The song you thought you lost." Mark didn't answer. He just kept playing, because some truths don't need to be spoken. They just need to be heard. It was the first warm afternoon of spring when the new piano arrived at Edison Elementary. A Steinway, upright, deep mahogany keys as smooth as ivory rain, paid for not by school funds but by donations that had flooded in after the fundraiser. Some from parents, some from strangers. Many came with short notes. "Your music gave my son courage." I didn't know I needed to hear that song until I did. Please keep playing. Mark stood in the corner of the music room, arms folded across his chest, watching 2 delivery men wheel the instrument into place. Behind him, Emily peeked through the door, practically vibrating with excitement. "Dad," she whispered, "it's perfect." He smiled. "Yeah, it is." Lauren entered moments later, clipboard in hand, her eyes lighting up when she saw the piano. She crossed the room, slowly trailed her fingers along the top, then looked at Mark. "You'll play at the dedication?" she asked. He pretended to think. "Well, if I must." She arched an eyebrow. Mark chuckled. "Of course I will." The following Friday, the school auditorium filled again, but not with folding chairs and PTA snacks. This time it was students, teachers, grandparents, neighbors who hadn't been inside a school in decades. No one was quite sure what to expect. A few whispered about the man who'd played that night in the gym. Others nudged each other when they saw the beautiful piano sitting center stage. Emily sat in the front row holding a small bouquet of daffodils. Mark stepped onto the stage with calm that surprised even himself. He wore no tie, no polished shoes, just his old gray shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows and a quiet sense of arrival. He sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and looked out at the room. His eyes found Emily, then Lauren. He nodded, and then he played. But this time it wasn't Clair de Lune. It wasn't even song for Emily. It was something entirely new. A melody built not from sadness or regret, but from gratitude. From joy. It rose gently, like morning light creeping across a quiet kitchen table. It danced with warmth, hummed with hope. The notes were simple, but they shimmered, each one chosen, each one honest. And beneath the melody was something deeper still, the heartbeat of a man who had come home to himself. Halfway through, Emily stepped up on stage and joined him, playing a soft counter-melody he'd taught her only days before. She missed a note, then another, but she kept going. And Mark smiled through every one of them. By the final chord, the room was silent, moved, changed. The applause was long and loud, but what stayed after was something quieter, something richer. Later that evening, after the room had emptied and the spring air had cooled, Mark, Emily, and Lauren walked through Mill River Park hand in hand in hand. They didn't speak at first. Birdsong filled the dusk, and the river caught the golden blush of the setting sun. In the distance, children laughed. A dog barked. Life moved gently, beautifully forward. "You know," Mark said finally, "I used to think the best parts of me were behind me, that the stage I never stood on was the story I'd never tell." Lauren looked at him, her hand tightening slightly in his, and now he looked at Emily, skipping ahead slightly, arms out like airplane wings. Now he said, "I know the best parts of me were waiting." Lauren stopped walking and turned toward him. "You didn't just come back to music, Mark. You came back to yourself." He smiled, a little crooked, a little raw. "I guess I just needed someone to believe I still had a song left in me." She reached up and brushed his cheek. "You don't have a song left in you." She leaned closer, their foreheads nearly touching. "You have a lifetime." And he believed her. Not because she said it like a line from a storybook, but because when her eyes met his, they didn't just see who he had been, they saw everything he still could be. That night back at home, after Emily had gone to bed and the fire had burned low, Mark sat at the piano again. Just him. Just the keys. The notebook on the stand now filled with bars and markings, some messy, some neat, but all his. He placed his hands on the keys and closed his eyes. They remembered. They remembered every note, every silence, every moment when he thought he had lost it forever. But they also remembered the first time Emily hugged him after a performance. The first time Lauren's voice rose to meet his. The first time he played not for judges or audiences or applause, but for love. And so he began again. A new song. Because some hands, no matter how calloused or scarred, never truly forget what they were made for. They only wait for the right moment and the right people to remember. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below and let us know what part of the story moved you the most. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories just like this one. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Until next time, take care and keep believing in the quiet miracles all around you.